5 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Equities resuming their sell-off, driven by stocks exposed to Anthropic's AI disruption. Earnings continue to pour in. AMD fails to impress investors. Alphabet up next. And Iran asks the US to move the upcoming talks from Turkey to Oman and to focus on just the nuclear program. So let's have a look at how markets are setting up for the day, because yesterday did turn into a day of selling for equities, even if it didn't look like that at the beginning of the session. Sure, S&P futures are fairly flat right now, but if you look at Nasdaq 100 futures, were pointed lower. Yesterday's almost 1.6% decline on the Nasdaq 100, more or less erasing its gains for the year. For the year to date now, it's only up just more than 1/3%. The Russell 2000 is still the exception. We are pointed higher today, and that index is up nearly 7% for the year. So the AI trade seemingly not impacting the Russell 2000 as much. All about the Fed, I guess, for the Russell 2000. Speaking of which, you have yields coming back down just a couple of basis points in the last 24 hours or so, with a 30-year yield still at 4.90 and the 10-year yield at 4.27. That 2-year yield just below 3.58 where we have been. So that curve really holding its shape over the last 24 hours. And then when it comes to metals, we are seeing gold continue its rise. So remember, it dropped 20%. Well, it's back up more than 10% from that low point and back above $5,000. Bitcoin struggling to find levels. Michael Burry saying, look, it's been disproven now. It is just a speculative asset. That's just one opinion. All right, let's get to some individual market movers now. And for that, we'll go to London and Chloe Melly.
Good morning, Bonnie. AMD is in the red this morning after providing a sales forecast that disappointed investors. So this will be seen as a sign that the company is perhaps not making inroads in AI as successfully or as quickly as investors had hoped. And this might also mean that AMD might be playing catch up with Nvidia for a little while longer. And we are down almost 8% in pre-market trading. On the other hand, AI was a big boost for Supermicro with really strong sales of its servers that are used to run data centers. So that is a nice boost for a company that had said at the previous quarter that there had been delayed contracts that really hurt the results, and we are up more than 12%. And finally, let's move on completely from AI and go over to Chipotle, which is down after providing a forecast that was also quite disappointing to investors. This is a company that had a tough 2025 already and is struggling to appeal to budget-conscious consumers and also to operate in this now market where a lot of people are on weight loss drugs.
Never a dull earnings season, that's for sure. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there. And coming up in this hour, a closer look at this equity market with Robinhood CIO Stephanie Guild. Starting off with tech then, a global market rout taking a pause after it wiped out $285 billion in stocks. That sell-off was sparked by Anthropic's new AI automation tool with potential disruption capabilities across industries, including software, financial services, and asset management. For more, Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie joins. Tom, it was a really incredible reaction because not only did you have some of these companies selling off that provide software to, the legal industry and so on, but you also had their funders, right, the Blue Owls and the private capital providers. It really did seem to shake this industry. Was it an overreaction?
Well, there could be an argument from investors out there and from those watching the space that the baby was thrown out with the bathwater in the last 24 hours on the reaction to this kind of plug-in and pull-out trade that we've seen, kind of mini DeepSeek again in terms of the shakeout that we've seen, particularly across the software stocks. But to your point, the linkages all the way through to private credit and private equity as well. There seems to be a moment where investors are still trying to assess the value of some of these software companies, which ones will thrive, which ones will survive in this AI world. It's hard to think that they'll all be wiped out. There will be winners, there will be losers. The problem for now is that many investors do not have a clear answer on where that lands, so they're just selling on the back of this story. You should expect that more of these large language models, the OpenAIs of the world, the Anthropics of the world, and the Googles of the world with Gemini will continue to come out with these additional verticals that will challenge some of these spaces. So we can expect further volatility, I think. They are all under pressure to ship product to try and monetize the proposition. But certainly we're seeing the effects of that in the London session today. We're seeing software companies like Sage, you're seeing SAP over in Germany, you're seeing companies like Capgemini over in France, the London Stock Exchange Group still under pressure on the back of this story. So to your point, it's not just the software companies, it's financial services, asset managers, private credit and private equity. When we get a bit of a stabilization is going to be a question, I think, in terms of this trade. We're starting to think, to see some evidence that this is starting to stabilize. But it's also a reminder that we cannot just buy the basket on AI. You have to differentiate, is the argument for many, and you have to make sure you're picking your spots on this AI theme.
Yeah, investors really reassessing valuations. Can I ask you about NVIDIA and its $20 billion in OpenAI funding? Because we just heard from Jensen Huang earlier in the week, and that caused ructions in markets too, right? When he seemed to be pulling back on the $100 billion investment.
Yeah, it certainly did. And of course, it followed the Wall Street Journal reporting over the weekend that insiders at NVIDIA were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with an overall $100 billion commitment to OpenAI. And to your point, we had those comments from Jensen Huang saying this was never a firm commitment, but they still saw OpenAI as a very, very solid investment proposition. Now we had the reporting from our team, of course, stateside, that they will be committing potentially $20 billion into OpenAI. That would be the biggest single investment, by the way, from NVIDIA into the maker of ChatGPT, which is, of course, trying to raise, in its latest fundraise, $100 billion. We may get about $50 billion from Amazon. They may be getting about $30 billion from Salesforce, and then NVIDIA coming through to round things out with that $20 billion. It hasn't been signed and sealed yet, so that's a caveat, but it does seem to illustrate that there still is that commitment from NVIDIA to support and invest in OpenAI.
Tom, if there is a bellwether for AI, it's NVIDIA, right? But if there is another one, it's its smaller rival AMD, and that certainly underwhelmed investors with its sales forecast. What can we tell about the broader industry from AMD results?
Yeah, which, by the way, was a beat. You know, they beat on the forecast. So they just didn't. It's this stretched expectation story again when it comes to investors. They didn't beat the top end analysts' view in terms of where they could get for the forecast of 10 billion. They came in at 9.8 billion. The data center unit, which is the AI play for AMD, they actually saw 40% growth there. So they're hitting their metrics, but it's the expectation story. And to your point, it's in the second half when they come out with these new chips, they really start to take market share from NVIDIA. The key concern for investors seems to be that AMD has yet to prove that it's really substantially, significantly taking market share from NVIDIA, and that seems to be what's weighing on the stock today.
All right, Tom, we'll see how it all shakes out. It could be a different story by the end of the week. Tom McKenzie, host of Bloomberg Tech Europe, thank you. Another stock taking a dive is Novo Nordisk. Shares plunging as much as 20% in early Copenhagen trading after forecasting a steep decline in sales. The CEO joined Bloomberg.
When you, of course, get a pricing headwind on your GLP-1 products, Wegovy and Ozempic, you feel the pressure of that more. But also on the back of course, being a focused company and being the best in what we do, we feel very confident that the volume buildup will happen script by script, and we have seen the early signals of that with our Wegovy pill launch. So I'm very hopeful that while we're disappointing the investors today on a short-term price decrease, they will be quite happy to see that we will be able to obtain a lot of gain from the volumes that entails within diabetes and obesity.
Mike Duster there, speaking with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix, and joining us now is Bloomberg's Sam Fazeli. So Sam, he has a big job ahead of him, as so many challenges. You come to market with these revolutionary drugs, right? They're extraordinarily popular, and suddenly you're under fire from telehealth, from copycats, from the President Trump administration, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody, I think, was of the view that over the long term, prices are going to need to come down and volume needs to go up. What is, I think, upsetting investors perhaps and the market a little bit today and yesterday is the fact that it's happening so fast. If you look back, Q3, JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, the CEO was pretty clear about the expectation of price pressure impacting 2026. I think what happened is that folks perhaps didn't expect it to be as much as the numbers that we're seeing here. Is it possible, Vonnie, that he's putting the worst case scenario forward here and that he's setting himself up for doing better? It is. We just have to wait and see if that volume then comes back behind it. And of course, don't forget that although the CEO said that the oral pill, Wegovy, that they've got is doing great, and that is definitely the case. You can track it on the terminal in terms of numbers of prescriptions. Lilly is going to be coming to market with his own small molecule in the second quarter at some point. So that's going to be interesting to watch too.
Yeah, and he did mention that these are new customers. It's not cannibalizing from the injection, right? So that is good for the company. What, in terms of the pipeline, is most exciting for Novo? What should they be betting big on, do you think?
I think they've got their eyes on, obviously, the CagriSema, the combination of an amylin and a GLP-1. Novo Nordisk is doing the same thing. Everybody is at this game to try and get a better side effect profile, which is, I think, the key thing to try and do here. I think we're good with the weight loss, maintenance of weight loss, finding out the doses that they need. But really, in terms of new product developments, is in this world of GLP-1s, GIPs, anything to do with the G, or the amylin world, is about trying to manage those side effects. And there's a host of other companies that are developing drugs totally different in mechanism to try and deal with that muscle wasting potentially that some of these folks have talked about or suffer. That's another angle that I think is going to come to fruition in the next 3 or 4 years.
Amazing. Sam, thank you so much. That is Sam Fazeli of Bloomberg Intelligence. Now to banks in Europe. UBS share is declining despite a beat in fourth quarter earnings. The Swiss lender announcing a $3 billion buyback program for 2026 with the potential for more.
We are now confident that we're going to ramp up in 2026 to 125 billion of net new assets, and then in 2028 surpass the 200 billion. So we always knew that restoring the profitability in terms of revenue on risk-weighted assets would potentially cost asset growth. We are focusing on sustainable growth and value-added growth, not growth per se.
Sergio Amotti, the UBS CEO, speaking there with the Pulse anchor Francine Lacroix, who joins us now with the latest from Zurich. And Fran, obviously, he has a big job ahead of him too, the integration of Credit Suisse and so on. It seems to be going well so far. What's next on the agenda? What do shareholders want to see?
Hi, Vonnie. So he was pretty optimistic. You're right. Everything seems to be going to plan. There was a little bit of a disappointment maybe on the wealth, especially on the U.S. side. But actually, he kind of tried to turn it into a positive, saying, look, we're in good shape. Inflows are fine. You know, there's nothing to see here was the general message. Of course, there are two big things that we need to watch out for. One is the capital requirements. Now, Sergio Amotti didn't really want to get drawn into this because this is something that's ongoing negotiations between, of course, the bank, all big banks, i.e. UBS, and policymakers. But the other thing is that we had a pretty good conversation, a pretty long conversation on the markets. I asked him about valuations, and he says, look, things will have to adjust, so we just have to get used to valuations. It doesn't have a huge impact in how clients are behaving differently. He took it as a positive that we now have the appointment of a Fed chair. But again, this volatility will stay, and it depends on what kind of bet you have. We also talked and touched on M&A a little bit.
And also succession, right? Because I guess we had the idea that he might be stepping down in 2027, but he's sort of throwing a little bit of cold water on that idea. He said to you, when we say that I will stay until at least the early part of 2027, it doesn't mean that I'm going to step down. Where are investors looking in this succession process?
Yeah, again, he's quite tight-lipped, but you know, he kept on going back to the idea, because I also asked him that there was this rumor that was started by his own chairman saying that Sergio Amotti would be a great chair. He says, look, he's really focused on the task at hand. They have internal candidates. He said that, you know, the succession process is continuing kind of, you know, as expected. But you're right, when I asked him about 2027 and whether he would really step down in April of that year, he initially said, let's see, and then he backtracked and saying, look, there's a lot of things going on because of the capital requirements, because of the M&A that some of his competitors like Santander are doing, and they're not. And so he was, I would say, quite mysterious in exactly what the plan forward is. I guess if you're in, you know, at the start of 2026, with everything, Vonnie, that's going on in the markets, April 2027 feels like a long way off.
Yes, it sure does. And you mentioned Santander buying Webster there to bet big on the US. Another story today. Francine, thank you. Wonderful interview, Bloomberg. The Pulse host, Francine Lacroix. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Federal Reserve Governor Stephen Miron has stepped down from his post leading the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He took a leave of absence from the White House in September when he filled the unexpired term of former Fed Governor Adriana Kugler. That term expired in January, but Miron can remain at the Fed until a successor is confirmed by the Senate. Strong inflows into Europe's credit markets have driven a gauge of risk to its lowest since the financial crisis. A Bloomberg measure of euro investment-grade bond spreads fell to 72 basis points. That takes it now to the tightest since 2007. And sources say Anthropic is working on a deal to let some employees sell shares in the company at a valuation of at least $350 billion. The details of the tender offer haven't been finalized. Anthropic declined to comment. Coming up, Iran calls for a change in venue for talks with the US later this week. More on that next. This is Bloomberg.
They are negotiating. They'd like to do something, and we'll see if something is going to be done. They had a chance to do something a while ago, and it didn't work out, and we did Midnight Hammer. I don't think they want that happening again, but they would like to negotiate. We are negotiating with them right now, yes.
President Trump reiterating that diplomatic talks between Washington and Tehran are ongoing after the US shot down a drone in the Arabian Sea. Iran now asking the meeting between the two countries set for Friday to focus only on nuclear activities and to be in Oman instead of in Turkey. Joining us from Istanbul is Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes. Patrick, why the move of venue? Is Iran suddenly allergic to the idea of regional countries getting involved?
Hi, Vonnie. Yeah, the latest we understand is that Iran is seeking this move from Istanbul that we understood had been planned for Friday now to Oman. It's not clear why they might not be keen on Turkey, but it is worth saying Oman has been a mediator, a host of talks before, so perhaps they simply felt that was more comfortable. The other detail that you mentioned was we've also reported that Iran is resisting the participation by other regional countries in these talks. They want it to be bilateral. I think it's worth mentioning that there have been multiple diplomatic tracks trying to make these talks happen. So on the one hand, the uncertainty over very basic things like location, even scope today, there's confusion over will it be limited to nuclear, as Iran is indicating it wants, or as the US wants, something broader encompassing ballistic missiles, proxies as well. That uncertainty is negative for the diplomatic prospects, but as I say, it's also testament to the fact there have been multiple diplomatic tracks, all the countries in the region mobilizing to try and find a solution. And I think it perhaps just shows that one of many modalities for that is going to emerge.
Yeah, President Trump has always signaled that both discussion about proxy militias and Iran's support for them and its ballistic missiles have to be part of the discussions. And of course, recently, the protests inside Iran were obviously of purport as well to these discussions. Does all that go away or Iran walks?
I think it's testament to, the US's ask has been a moving target from the very start, right? Initially, as you say, it was about protesters and security forces not shooting on them. That red line was crossed, came and went. We've since moved on to a kind of situation equivalent to before June last year, when Israel and later the US ended up bombing Iran. So it feels kind of opportunistic on the US's part, right? That protest-linked demand may have come and gone, but they see a chance, obviously, with the help of those US military assets that have been moving into the region, to seize the moment to pressure Iran for those more fundamental issues that have plagued that relationship for decades.
Patrick, thank you so much. As always, Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes in Istanbul there. Coming up, the House of Representatives cancels a contempt vote as the Clintons agree to testify on Epstein. More on that and what else is making headlines in your front page news. Next, this is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up, the Financial Times reporting Amundi is reducing its exposure to the US over the coming year and is turning to European and emerging markets. CEO Valerie Baudson says the firm is advising clients to shift away from the dollar, warning it will continue to weaken if US economic policy remains unchanged. Amundi is Europe's largest asset manager. Next up on the New York Times, House Republicans have cancelled a planned vote to hold Bill and Hillary Clinton in criminal contempt of Congress after they agreed to be deposed on camera regarding their ties to Jeffrey Epstein. The Republican chairman of the House committee ignored the Clintons' request for the depositions to be made in public. They will be taking place February 26th and 27th. And finally, on the Wall Street Journal's front page, President Trump doubling down on his view that Republicans should, quote, nationalize voting in the US, questioning whether certain states should continue running their own elections as spelled out in the Constitution. Trump referred to cities such as Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta as places of alleged corruption. Democrats have criticized Trump's suggestions, calling them a dangerous undermining of democratic principles. Some Republicans have expressed opposition to federalizing elections, according to the Journal. All right, let's take a look at these markets because we look to be pointing higher now on S&P futures, trying to decide on the AI trade. On the one hand, Supermicrocomputer is up 11% in the pre-market this morning on demand for AI gear. On the other hand, you have all those software companies that took an absolute dive yesterday on Anthropic coming out with tools that might replace some of what they do. The dollar index a little stronger. Keep an eye on the yen as well. We have those elections coming up February 8th, and the yen is definitely weaker today, above 156.40. The 10-year yield really in place, down just about a basis point from 24 hours ago, 428 there. Coming up, we're going to be speaking with Stephanie Guild of Robinhood. She's seeing opportunities in software and pharma in spite of the sell-offs. This is Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Equities resuming what might be a sell-off, although futures have turned positive now. Stocks exposed to Anthropic's AI disruption experiencing losses yesterday. Earnings continue to pour in as well. AMD fails to impress investors. Alphabet up next. And Iran asking the US to move upcoming talks from Turkey to Oman and to focus only on its nuclear program. So let's take a look at these markets because we have a bit of a bifurcation in the AI trade. We have SMCI up more than 12% on demand for AI gear. On the other hand, you have all these software stocks and their funders dropping substantially in yesterday's trade, which really provided a sell-off to the market, in fact, almost erasing the Nasdaq 100 gains for the year. That index is only up about 1/3% now on the year. Different story for the Russell 2000. It's pointed higher today, and it's up almost 7% year to date. So that story and the Federal Reserve story that will impact smaller and medium-sized stocks clearly helping there. Let's get to the bond universe. No real movement from yesterday, down a basis point maybe on the long end. The 30-year yield still at 4.90, 10-year yield at 4.27. And then in precious metals, we have gold rising once again. We're well above $5,000 an ounce. Silver also higher in today's trade. Let's get to some individual movers now for some stocks to watch. Here's Chloe Melly.
Good morning, Vonnie. AMD is down more than 7% this morning after a sales forecast that fell short of expectations. So that is adding to some worries that the company is not making inroads in AI as successfully as had been hoped, and also that it has still a little bit further to go before it can actually catch up with Nvidia. And so we are down more than 7% in pre-market trading. Moving on to Enphase, which is up very strongly after saying it expects orders to be boosted ahead of the expiration of a tax breaks related to clean energy investments. So that would be a big boost for orders of its solar panels, and therefore we are up more than 23% for Enphase this morning. And finally, Novo Nordisk in Copenhagen is down massively after saying that it expects sales to decline quite steeply in 2026 because of the pricing pressure that it is facing. It had a tough 2025. It looks like 2026 will also be very difficult for that company.
All right, Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there in London. Stephanie Guild of Robinhood weighing in on the software sell-off yesterday, writing, quote, despite the recent sell-off, a look at software companies in the largest 1,000 stocks reveals good fundamentals, roughly 2 times higher cash flow margins and significantly less debt compared to the broader stocks. Stephanie is CIO at Robinhood, and she joins us now. So, Stephanie, you do see an opportunity here to buy the dip, so-called, but is the dip in? Are we going to see more of a sell-off?
It's part of my note that I wrote. It was a quote from a larger note that I wrote where I wasn't willing to be a hero yet, in that Right now, the whole sector seems to be in free fall, and technicals don't seem to be mattering. If you're looking at it, it's well below its, the whole sector is well below its 50-day and 200-day moving average. And so right now, I think it's just a place that you need to watch and sort of decide, take the time to actually decide which ones may be really well undervalued. And I do think there's going to be some spots that come out of that. I think, for example, Microsoft is probably going to end up in a much better position than the market is really giving it credit for right now.
And why is that, Stephanie? Is it valuation, or is it their essential product and what they're offering investors?
That they're an essential product. I do believe that while the likes of Claudebot, for example, can start to impede on what people are using, I don't actually think a lot of the things that Microsoft has, for example, are really going to necessarily need Claudebot. I think you could end up seeing where Microsoft has its own AI and they are in the application layer, and that ends up being a place that can actually compete with the likes of Claudebot, because I do think it is very disruptive for most companies to completely change using an entire software in one go. And so I do think this is starting to become a bit more speculation than really what we know.
Yeah, and even, extending to the funders of these companies, the BDCs and so on, it was really quite the trade yesterday. But obviously investors are rethinking valuations in some areas of the market, and pharma is another one. Again, if you had bought by now, you'd be sorry, because many of the pharma stocks are dipping post earnings at the moment. Is now a good time to buy?
We started adding to, in Robinhood strategy, we started adding to pharmaceuticals in October. So we're feeling like, this is part of the market rethinking what technology will mean in the future. And obviously there's pressure on some of the larger pharmas. You mentioned Novo Nordisk earlier, because, I think about they're sort of known for GLP-1 drugs, and there's a lot of competition now, I think, I don't know about you, but I get ads all the time on social media for different compounded versions of it. So I do think you have to pick your spots. This is truly like a stock picker's market. So we're certainly not saying like buy pharma broadly, but we're saying that we do think, just like in software, there's going to be an opportunity or two to take advantage of any sort of sell-off.
I want to mention Mike Wilson's note today to his team at Morgan Stanley, saying that it might be time to add exposure to consumer discretionary stocks trading at cheaper prices, because, there could be upside, and particularly if gold, changes in valuation, that might provide some liquidity for people to buy these cheaper consumer stocks. And you've had that thought for some time. Tell us about some of the consumer stocks that you like.
Yeah, I'm starting to see this market as like a market of things over services. And when we started looking at some of the consumer names towards the end of last year, it just looked like a place that they had, maybe we'll get there in the software sector as well, where things had sold off quite a bit. And so, for example, one name that we like is VF Corp. It's a name that has a number of different brands, and similar to Gap, which has also done relatively well if you look over the course of 2025 and into this year, is that there's a focus on becoming more efficient. I think there's nothing better than kind of a scare like tariffs to get a company to start thinking like, how are we operating and how can we be more efficient? And VF Corp, they sold Dickies, they've been paying down debt, and they're looking to focus on revitalizing the brands that they have. And, I have a daughter who's sort of a preteen, and I think there actually can be a good barometer. And I know their collab between North Face and Skims was something that definitely got, a certain subset excited.
Yes. I want to mention Alex Altman's research at Barclays as well, because he put out a note suggesting that the changing of the guard at the Fed will inject turbulence no matter what. It always does. He talks about an average drawdown of 5%, 12% and 16% over 1, 3 and 6 months after a new chair takes the helm. Would you be concerned about that?
I think it depends on the situation that we're in. It's certainly the market has started to react to this already. When you think about the concern that the new Fed chair is going to be extremely hawkish about the balance sheet, and despite being dovish on rates. But I do think you have to look back and say, like, what situations were the Fed chairs in when they arrived, and what did they have to deal with? I think we were in a place, you saw in 2016, there was when, sorry, not 2016, 2018, when Powell took over, there was a big, drop in markets, but I think it sort of had a lot to do with other things. Like we were kind of fighting a trade war with China at the time, at least here in the U.S. And the market wanted to, or the Fed wanted to raise rates, and the market said no, and then they listened. So I do think it takes it depends on what environment we're in, and rather than just drawing a conclusion blankly.
Stephanie, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much. Stephanie Guild there of Robinhood. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Santander shares dropping as much as 5% after it announced the acquisition of Connecticut-based Webster Financial in a $12 billion deal. It is the biggest intraday drop for those shares since October. But the deal allows Spain's largest bank to expand its U.S. operations. The Big Short investor Michael Burry warning that Bitcoin's plunge could deepen into a self-reinforcing death spiral. Burry argued that Bitcoin has been exposed now as a purely speculative asset, failing to take off as a debasement hedge similar to precious metals, and that further losses could rapidly strain the balance sheets of major holders. And the US continues to ramp up pressure on Iraq over the post of Prime Minister. Sources say the US told Iraqi officials it would reduce the country's access to oil export revenues if it appointed Nouri al-Maliki, who is seen as too close to Iran, for its premier. Coming up, Fed Governor Stephen Miron steps down from his post at the White House. That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York. Fed Governor Stephen Miron has stepped down from leading the White House Council of Economic Advisers. He wrote in a letter to President Trump, quote, "I promised the Senate that if I should stay on the board past January, I would formally depart the council. I believe it is important to stay true to my word while I continue to perform the job at the Federal Reserve to which you and the Senate appointed me." Joining us now is Kate Ackley of Bloomberg Government in Washington. I guess this prompts plenty of questions, Kate, including what happens to his role at the White House now? Does somebody else take that on? And I guess, how long does he stay at the Fed? How long is he welcome?
Well, it seems like his position at the Fed is the one that, Trump has nominated last week Kevin Warsh to be, he wants to be the chairman of the Fed. So that would likely swap out his seat. And that's going to be kind of a tough confirmation fight in the Senate, where you have even Republican Senator Tom Tillis. He has concerns that, really at stake here, at issue, a big kind of flashpoint is independence of the Federal Reserve. So that's going to be in the context of Kevin Warsh's confirmation hearings. We're going to see a lot about that. And so when he was stepping down from having that, he was on unpaid leave from his White House role. Senate Democrats, particularly on the banking committee, had been, criticizing that arrangement as recently as this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now the partial shutdown has ended with President Trump signing a funding deal that he negotiated with Democrats. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
I'm thrilled to sign the Consolidated Appropriations Act to immediately reopen the federal government and fund the vast majority of operations through the rest of the fiscal year. We've succeeded in passing a fiscally responsible package that actually cuts wasteful federal spending while supporting critical programs for the safety, security, and prosperity of the American people.
So, as he says, the vast majority, quote unquote, of operations funded through September, right? But not everything, Kate. What happens to, the agency basically that's been left out of all of this?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security is the one that it was really the sticking point here after the deaths in Minnesota by federal agents, with all the unrest there going on. So I think 9 days we have with this patch, sort of a stopgap patch to keep DHS funded, through these 9 days. And then there's going to have to be either another long-term continuing resolution to keep DHS funded, or it will enter into that piece of the government being shut down for some period of time as lawmakers and the president, fight it out.
Yeah, that fight continuing, and not on partisan lines either. It's an interesting one to watch. If we look abroad, Iran has asked the US now to change the site for talks to Oman from Turkey, and also to limit the talks to, things just nuclear related, whereas President Trump had wanted to talk proxy militia funding, ballistics and so on. Where does that leave those talks, Kate?
Well, it certainly heightens tensions here in Washington with respect to this relationship with Iran. And it, just injects more uncertainty where there's been discussions of the potential for, military action, and people have used the sort of word war. So it's a volatile situation, and the change in location, the change in parameters just injects more uncertainty and the potential for more volatility in that relationship.
All right, those talks taking place later this week. Kate Ackley of Bloomberg Government, thank you so much. Futures potentially taking a breather after a global market rout that wiped out $285 billion in stocks. That sell-off sparked by Anthropic's new AI automation tool with potential disruption across industries, including software, financial services and asset management. Let's bring in Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence for more. It's not like we didn't know something like this was coming, Matt. Why the sudden revaluation of so many whole industries, in fact?
Yeah, it's been interesting, isn't it? Because I think this has been a bit of a slow drip feed into the market. Obviously, Anthropic launched the Claude Cowork service, which kind of really started to kind of impress people. And then the trigger, if you like, yesterday was the announcement on their site of a new AI agent for legal profession, and that was really the kind of I guess the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of these worries that that AI disruption is going to be kind of much more kind of broad-based, and not just disrupting established players in industries that historically haven't leveraged this kind of technology, but the Claude software in particular is making people worry that even kind of recent innovators, like for example ServiceNow, may be threatened because of the way that Anthropic can use Claude to develop code, incredibly powerful code, in such a short space of time. I think it feels to some degree that the sell-off's been a bit indiscriminate, a bit perhaps like the buying of anything AI related was a bit indiscriminate on the upside. And I think it shows you that this year there's going to be a lot of focus amongst investors about parsing more clearly who the real winners and losers are going to be from the AI revolution.
And whether it's really just as simple as plugging out, your ServiceNow software and just using something from Anthropic. Can I ask you about the NVIDIA deal? It's nearing a deal to invest $20 billion in OpenAI. I mean, Jensen Huang had said, okay, he hadn't committed to 100 billion, but they were certainly going to invest a lot in OpenAI. What would this buy them?
I think it kind of buys them, a hedge, if you like, that they've got a customer that can continue to commit to buying NVIDIA chips. But obviously, both sides of this deal have been diversifying their investments. In the case of NVIDIA, investing across multiple LLM providers, and in the case of OpenAI, expanding its technology choices beyond just the NVIDIA GPUs. So I think there'll be some reassurance that that original $100 billion deal that was mooted, that never really got signed, hasn't completely died, and this is the kind of perhaps first step in that. I think perhaps more helpful to OpenAI, because there's been a lot of question marks recently about where funding comes from to kind of fuel the voracious appetite of these LLMs to develop their products and compete with each other. Obviously, we've seen the news with SpaceX merging xAI, and at least to some degree, that was about providing funding for their own LLM platform. So I think it's a good outcome for OpenAI for sure.
Alphabet is the only one of the Mag 7 that's actually hit an all-time high this year. It reports later, so does Qualcomm. What should we be looking out for?
So on Alphabet, on the sales side, I think reassurance that the ad business, which is the vast bulk of their revenues, is being resilient. Market's looking for about 13% year-on-year growth, and that the cloud business is still growing at about 30 to 35%. Also, the big number people are looking at is their capital spending budget for 2026. The market's looking for about a 30% increase year over year to about $120 billion. So we'll be interested to see whether there's upside to that. I think on balance, people might be expecting them to commit to more, given what we saw recently from Meta. And I think Qualcomm is really a kind of a signal of the health of the smartphone market, given the pressures that we're seeing from higher memory chip pricing. So I think that's kind of really what people are going to be looking for, particularly in Qualcomm.
All right, we'll be breaking them all down tomorrow morning. Matt Bloxham, thank you so much. Bloomberg Intelligence's Matt Bloxham there. And Uber also scheduled to set the tone for the gig economy peers. The rideshare and delivery company reporting quarterly results before the market open. Bloomberg's managing editor for global business of the Americas, Craig Trudell, joins with more now. So, Craig, the focus, no doubt, will be on, self-driving, I guess, after Waymo's valuation earlier this week, right?
Yeah, it's really a remarkable story for Uber, where they're increasingly sort of exposed to the ups and downs of everybody's expectations for Waymo and self-driving more broadly, despite the fact that the sort of core business for Uber has continued to perform extremely well. Even as autonomous vehicles start to deploy more across more parts of the U.S. and even internationally. This is a company that, their core metric of gross bookings is expected to grow at, a 20% rate. So it's by no means a case where, this company has sort of peaked out and is facing, really substantial headwinds in spite of the fact of this sort of technological shift.
Now, the stock did hit a record in October, so it's not like investors haven't been appreciating this stock, but it's down 22% since then. I mean, is that a big dent for the company?
Yeah, I think it's a communications challenge for them where, they have to sort of walk people through, how they see the autonomous vehicle future sort of play out and what sort of role they're going to play. They've been extremely aggressive in the last year or so with sort of partnering with everybody under the sun who's pursuing this technology, the one big exception being Tesla, which wants to sort of own everything itself. But, Tesla is also in a position where they're making a lot more noise in this space than actually executing and not, building much of a substantial business. It's been a much slower than Elon Musk has sort of alluded to. And so, for Uber, they have to sort of explain, just how much this is disrupting them to any extent and how they're going to answer that.
Oh, well, just a few hours to go before we'll hear more. Bloomberg's Craig Trudell, thank you. This is Bloomberg. Now a look at what's ahead today. First up, Eli Lilly, AbbVie, Uber, Boston Scientific, they're all on deck reporting before the opening bell. Plus, we do get ADP employment data. That's coming at 8:15 Eastern, followed by the PMIs at 9:45. And finally, later on today, Alphabet and Qualcomm earnings after the market close. Some micro movers now. AMD extending its post-earnings drop. Its sales forecast obviously underwhelming investors, but Super Microcomputer up 12.5% on a strong outlook, signaling renewed demand for AI gear. Silicon Laboratories also up more than 33%. An FT report that Texas Instruments is in talks to buy the chip designer for about $7 billion. Let's take a look at the macro picture. And that's it for Bloomberg Brief.